Hi everyone. Back in 2007, I was given a trip to Europe and we ended up in Italy in this small crescent-shaped area called the Ligurian Peninsula. We were in a town called San Remo. I didn't know this at the time, but focaccia, its best recipes come from that part of Italy. So today at TastiLab, I'm going to take you to the Ligurian region of Italy and show you how to make the beautiful focaccia that has made that region of Italy so famous. So for today's recipe, we're going to need some equipment. This is a medium bowl. We're going to need that to make some liquid measures, a large bowl for the dough, a whisk to combine the dough. We're going to need a measuring cup or two. We're going to need some measuring spoons, and we're going to need 2 of these sheet trays. These are actually commercial trays. They're easy to find. They're available at webstaurant.com. They're commonly called half sheet pans or jelly roll pans. We're going to need 2 of these. And we're also going to need another vital instrument, which is a kitchen scale. So when I normally cook, I kind of cook by feel. I taste things, adjust things, but when it comes to baking, this scale is really important. And there are 2 ways to measure. There's the US measure, which cups, half cups, 3/4 cups, or there's a metric equivalent, which has to do with grams. I'm going to show you how to make it both ways today, but to be honest, and I'm surprised to say this, I actually prefer the grams method. So we're going to need that as well. So before we get started, we've talked about measures. Let's talk about ingredients for a couple seconds. So you're going to need a couple things to make this recipe, and I'm going to go through those with you right now. So first of all, you're going to need about 2.5 cups or 600 grams of water. Tap water, 80 degrees. This is to proof the yeast and get it moving. How do you know again? If it's under your finger and it feels warm, you're good to go. You're going to need a half a teaspoon of dry active yeast. That's going to go inside the water as well to make the liquid. You're also going to need about 15 grams or 2.5 teaspoons of honey or a sweetener. Firstly, I prefer honey, but if you want to make a vegan recipe or you want a sugar substitute, you can actually use agave in exactly the same way, which is really good. Oh, there's the front. Exactly the same way, all right? You're also going to need extra virgin olive oil throughout the process, so make sure you have plenty on hand. And also a really good fruity olive oil, for me, makes a huge difference. You're also going to need flour. You're going to need about 800 grams or 2 1/3 cups of all-purpose flour. So the kinds you see at the grocery store that come in 5 and 10 pound bags, I buy it 25 pound bags. I go through so much, but you're going to need that much for this recipe. You're also going to need about 15 grams plus of this diamond crystal kosher salt. This salt is all I cook with when it comes to food. Its crystallization is the best. I don't know, it's my favorite salt. When I was growing up, we always had Morton's table salt. For some reason, this salts food better, and I actually end up using less. And there's less salty flavor because the crystals are larger. So we're going to need some of this. And at the very end, we're also going to need some fresh rosemary from my garden or from the grocery store. We're going to chop this up to go on top. And also too, what I'm going to talk about a little later is how to riff on this recipe and how to make it your own. And for the riff, I'm going to show you later, I actually use some Spanish olives that I really love from a Spanish market here in the Bay Area called the Spanish Table. You're going to see all about these too as well. So really, there isn't that much on this table. This is all you're going to need to make the most beautiful focaccia that you've ever had. So before we start making dough, one thing, focaccia takes some time to make. So why I call it 2-day focaccia is because there's a resting period between what we're doing here and what's going to happen tomorrow. So today what we're going to be doing is making the dough, putting it together, and letting Mother Nature do its magic. So tomorrow we're going to be ready to bake off our focaccia. So let's get started on making the dough. So what we're going to do first is combine some wet ingredients. Then we're going to put those into some dry ingredients to make the dough. So first off, I'm going to measure up a half a teaspoon of active dry yeast, which I keep in my refrigerator. There's that. Then I'm going to measure in and put in 15 grams of honey, which is about 2.5 teaspoons. Looks like this. Into this as well. Get in there. Then I'm going to add in 600 grams of water, which is about 2.5 cups. This water is about 80 degrees. the heat actually affects how the yeast gets activated. And if you don't measure this by temperature, you just place your finger under the tap. If it's lukewarm, it feels good. It's about 80 degrees. It's good enough. The span is between 80 and 100 degrees. So there's some forgiving there. We're going to mix this really well so that all three things are combined to activate the yeast, get the sugar in there to actually get the yeast making some fermentation. I'm going to set this aside now. Now what we're going to do, we're going to mix the dry ingredients. So how we're going to do that is we're going to take about 800 grams of flour, which is about 2.5 cups. Dump it in this large mixing bowl. Get it all out of there. We're going to take 15 grams of salt, which is about 2.5 teaspoons, and dump it in. We're going to use our whisk and mix this together. All right. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take and measure a 1/4 cup of really good olive oil. And we're going to place this olive oil back in this water that's easier. Olive oil is what makes focaccia taste really good. We're going to add this beautiful olive oil into this water mixture. We're going to then give this a stir as well. And then we're going to dump this into the dry ingredients. There's kind of a well happening in my bowl right now, which is kind of what I want. So then I'm going to mix this pretty well, dump this into my dry ingredients, and start to incorporate this. It'll come together really easy. So I'm using a rubber spatula right now because I like to keep the edges of the bowl scraped, but you're kind of going to stir this and mix it. You don't have to stir it too hard. It'll start to come together on its own. And you're suddenly going to see the flour becoming activated with the water. It's going to look kind of shaggy for a few minutes, but as the water begins to incorporate into the dough, you're going to see it's going to look kind of shaggy. It's going to come together really nicely. There we go. That looks wonderful. It doesn't take much mixing, actually. So, again, scraping the sides of the bowl. I'm going to turn this over one more time to get those pieces at the bottom of the bowl fully incorporated. And we're almost done. Excellent. This dough is mixed and ready for Mother Nature to take over. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this bowl, I'm going to cover it in plastic wrap, we're going to set it on the counter, we're going to leave it set for about 12 to 14 hours until this doubles in size. It'll take over most of the bowl. Then when that's ready, we're going to come back and start to actually make our focaccia and get it ready for the oven. That's going to happen 12 to 14 hours. Welcome back. So it's been about 12 hours and it's time to unearth our focaccia, take a look at it, and we're going to get the dough ready to go in the oven. So this is how my dough came out. It's tightly wrapped in plastic and we're ready to take a look at it. You'll notice that the dough looks wonderful and it's doubled in size quite nicely. You're going to see a lot of bubbling taking place, and that's the yeast activating with the flour. That's the good stuff. So it's looking really, really good. I'm ready to take this dough and get it into our pans. So what I'm going to do is take one of my two large half-sheet pans, and I'm going to measure in 3 tablespoons of that yummy extra virgin olive oil. 1, 2, 3. If you're not exact with this, a little more is okay. Then I'm going to take my hand and I'm actually going to then spread this olive oil through the pan all over. This is really important because it's going to act as to brown the bottom of the focaccia and have it so it releases really nicely when the focaccia is done. Now, the one thing I've learned in doing this, which is really important, is you have to take and you have to oil the sides of the pan as well. So I'm taking my fingers and I'm actually oiling the sides of the pan as well. It's really important, making sure it's all fully lubricated, ready for the dough. All right, that's looking really good. All right, I'm gonna wipe my hands off here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the focaccia dough and I'm going to place this dough, fold it, and layer it out into the pan. Let me get another spatula here. I love spatulas. So I'm going to take this, and you're going to see you can almost pour it out. So I'm going to start to release the dough from this large, beautiful large bowl. You're going to see just a little bit of urging. It starts to pour itself out onto the oiled pan. I'm not really in any hurry to do this. Let the dough kind of do its own deal. There's some olive oil on the bottom of the pan. That's totally fine. Scrape it out into here. Looking really good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take more of that olive oil and I'm going to take and put two more tablespoons of oil on top of this bread. I'm going to spread it across the top. 1, 2. All right. Now, we're ready to start working with the dough. Here's where the fun part happens. I'm going to take and spread this oil over the dough, nice and oily. That's what makes focaccia really good. And so what I'm going to do now is turn the pan so it's like this. I'm going to say portrait mode. And I'm going to begin to stretch the dough out toward the edges of the pan. So I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to place it under the dough and start to pull the dough out toward the edges. The oil in the pan really helps, you'll see, because it allows the dough to slide around the pan. You're going to notice too that the dough starts to retract a little bit. It's totally expected. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be stretching this dough a couple times over the next 30 minutes, because when we get done, what we want to have is a dough that's fully stretched into all 4 corners and around the edges of the pan. Once we get that done, we have one final proof. Let Mother Nature do her deal, and then in the oven we go. All right, again, stretching using the underside of my fingers. I'm also trying not to create any holes in the dough by pulling I'm not pulling it apart fully. But you'll see the dough really is starting to come toward the edges of the pan. See the bubbles? That's again the yeast activating with the sugar, causing the dough to rise. That's what causes the air bubbles in the dough. It makes it so yummy and light and airy when we're going to be eating it in just a little bit. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stretch this a couple more times in the next 30 minutes, and we'll be right back in about a half an hour. And we're going to show you what happens next and what makes this Ligurian focaccia taste so darn good. So this bread has been sitting for 30 minutes. We've actually stretched it to the edges. It looks really wonderful. You'll start to see there's again some bubbles forming in the dough, so the yeast is still activating and it's still proofing, which is exactly what you want, because the longer it proofs like this, the more light and airy it's going to be. But before we go any further, what I want to have us do is get ready to bake. I'm going to go over to my oven and I'm going to place my oven at 450 degrees to preheat. So I have a convection oven. I'm going to put it on convection. If you don't, normal bake will be just fine. But there's something else I want to talk to you about as well, is that a second sheet. So earlier today, I talked to you about these pans. Again, this is the second of 2. I got one here. This is the second half sheet pan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place this in the oven while it preheats, but I'm going to place it upside down like this. Now, what I'm going to do when it comes time to bake, I'm actually going to place this pan on top of this. And the reason we're doing that is that I want to make sure that the bottom crust of the focaccia gets really done, really golden and really crunchy. I know whenever I eat focaccia, the thing I look at first is the crust on the bottom. It's what makes the focaccia really yummy. So I want to make sure that that's done that way. So to get that done, what we need to do is add a little extra heat to the bottom of the pan. So I'm going to place this pan in the oven to let it preheat with the oven so that when we place the focaccia pan on top of it, it's gonna give the bottom of the crust a little added push. So it's actually crust crispy and yummy and just exactly what we want to have it done. I'm also going to place this in the middle of my oven so that it's going to get heat from both sides, but not in the top, not in the bottom, in the middle of my oven on the middle rack. Now that that's set, we're going to come back to the dough, and I want to do a couple things. So first off is I want to go ahead and make what I'm going to call a brine. And a brine happens to be 5 grams of salt, and it happens to be about a half cup of lukewarm water. I'm going to dump the salt into the water, and I'm going to give this a stir to fully dissolve this. I'm going to let that set for just a second. And while I'm doing that, I'm actually going to take, and I've actually pulled about a tablespoon of fresh rosemary from my garden. And I'm going to chop this up a little bit because we're going to be using this in just a second. So taking my knife, just a real rough cut, like this. Looking good, not too fine. It's kind of rough and kind of rustic. There we go, like that. But I want to show you one more thing too while I'm at it. Rosemary is an interesting thing, so I'm going to leave that aside. But how you can clean rosemary really easily off your garden is just take, if you get somewhere at the store even, you can go ahead and just pull this and pull the leaves off like this. And it comes right off, really easy. Just chop that off and off you go. That's how to deal with rosemary. Okay? Yummy. Looking forward to that. All right. Now that that's done, I'm going to leave that set for just a second. I'm going to go back to this brine that's looking really good. Now, back to the bread. Now comes the really fun part and what makes this focaccia so good. I'm going to take, what we're going to do is we're going to dimple the brine with our fingers. So I'm going to use these 3 fingers on both hands, and I'm going to go ahead and dimple the bread. So placing my fingers at the bread at an angle, like this. I'm going to move it around a little bit, and you're going to start to see that, I'm going to get ahead of myself here, that we're going to start putting dimples in the bread. Now, when you do that, make sure that the bread still moves around underneath, or the dough still moves around beneath your fingers. We don't want the oil to be just the bread onto the pan because it'll stick. You'll see, you'll get a feel for it. You'll see how it happens. So you're seeing that I'm starting to have dimples take place in this bread, which is exactly what I want to have. It's looking really yummy. All right. Looking really good. I'm taking a look for any places I want to redo a little bit, but that's looking really yummy. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to pour the brine over the top of the bread. So here we go. Now this brine is going to add a salt element to the bread so that we're going to fill these little crevices we just put in here. And this lovely salt water mixture is going to make the bread a little more moist and give it a really great salty taste. Really yummy. Now what I'm going to do is take this rosemary that I took and I chopped up. I'm going to sprinkle this over the top of the bread, just like this, really just easily over the top. And off we go. Now this is going to sit for another 45 minutes on the counter. It's the final proof. What's going to happen is it's going to settle in again once we have these dimples in the bread. It's going to become light and airy. And once the 45 minutes is up, this can go in the oven. But before we go anywhere, I want to show you another alternative here. Now, the one great thing about focaccia is that you can actually make it your own. So here I have a second batch, which I've proofed, ready to go. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to then, again, to start placing these holes in the dough, just like before. Same as before. But instead of using the rosemary, what I have here is some beautiful Spanish olives from a Spanish market that I love here. And I'm gonna just place these large sections of olive in the dough, like this. I don't want them too small, but I'm just going to go ahead and place these in the dough, kind of pushing them in as if they were the dimpling. I've actually pitted these olives and I've dried them off. I don't want to add any more water to the dough, but I want to add some nice meaty chunks of olive for some olive flavor. And I'm doing that here with this, and I push them into the dough like this. Olives are God's greatest creations. Love these things. Again, these olives are kind of dry. You can use other kinds of olives as well if you'd like Kalamatas, etc. But I would use a really good quality olive. Probably not the ones you'd buy in those small cans that you put in enchiladas, for example. Probably wouldn't use those, but anything else would probably do. The moisture content matters. So I try to pick an olive that's meaty and doesn't have a lot of moisture as part of its physical makeup, because it's going to add moisture to the dough, and I don't want water pockets to form around the dough while it's baking. So I'm trying not to do that. But what this is going to do, it's going to impart the olive oil flavor to the bread. And we're going to have this amazing, amazing olive-based focaccia in just a few minutes, as well as the other. I'm looking around, I got a few extra pieces. Doing good. Again, this is about a half cup of olives that I've cut and pitted, and I can't wait to eat. Looking good. All right, and that's looking great. And then once again, once I get this done, the brine goes over this, and we're gonna let this sit for 45 minutes as well, and it's gonna go in the oven too. Now, I'm gonna see you back in 45 minutes once the focaccia has a chance to do its final rise, and we're gonna put it in the oven. Keeping in mind, my oven is preheating at 450, and the second pan is in there heating with it, so it's really hot to get that bottom crust crunchy and delicious like we all want it to be. So it's been 45 minutes, and here's our focaccia that's been sitting, doing its final proof before we get in the oven. So what you're gonna see here is this beautiful focaccia ready to go, and it's also got this beautiful light, airy texture, full of bubbles. It's light, the yeast is still working, and it's actually providing some air within the dough, which is exactly what we want. Also, what we did in the last section was we actually preheated our oven to 450, and we placed the other baking tray upside down in the oven, so that this one is gonna go exactly on top of it. So let's do that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna put this right in the oven, and we are gonna bake this for 25 minutes. Maybe even 30. Let's take a look at it. Right in the oven, on top of the other tray. Can't wait. And I'm gonna set my timer for 25 minutes. That's baking at 450. Before we go any further, I need to thank somebody for their contribution to this video and my cooking. There's a woman that I've never met that I absolutely love. Her name is Samin Nosrat. She lives here in the Bay Area, and she wrote a cookbook called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. And she also did a show on Netflix with each one of those segments. If you haven't seen it, you must watch it. I think all cooks, all home cooks should watch and see the passion and love she places into food. The recipe that you've seen today that's in the oven and about to come out was actually based upon Samin's recipe for focaccia. I made a couple tweaks that I like because I wanted a certain way, but Samin was the inspiration for this video and for what you're about to eat in your home. Really, Samin, if you ever see this, I'm grateful to you. Thank you so much for, again, making me fall even more in love with cooking than I already was. But thank you for that. So we're back. We're about to take the focaccia out of the oven. It's been in there for 25 minutes. Oh, there it is. I'm actually gonna take my hot pads. We're gonna take a look at this and see how we're doing. Before we do that, I'm gonna actually place a towel on my work surface. Hot pans, I don't wanna burn this work surface. So let's do that. I'm really excited. I'm also going to get out a spatula so we can take a look at the crust. Put that right there. And here it comes. Wow, look at this. All right. This is what focaccia looks like. There we go. So let's take a look at this focaccia. It's looking really good. But the one thing I do want to check is just to make sure that the bottom crust is crunchy and golden, and all that olive oil and all that flour had a chance to make a beautiful, beautiful, crispy, crunchy texture. As I said earlier, the best part of the focaccia is the bottom part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my spatula here, and I'm going to try to pry a little bit of this focaccia up. Keep in mind, as it starts to cool off, it's going to release from the pan a little bit, but it can be a little bit stubborn sometimes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look and see for myself if that focaccia is done. It looked pretty good on that side. I'm going to look at it over here on this side and take a look. Oh, it looks beautiful. So we're done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take a little more olive oil, and I'm going to sprinkle it across here on top of the dough. In case you notice, focaccia loves olive oil. And I'm probably going to put a little more salt on here, just because I want to put a little salt on here to finish. We're going to let this cool off, and we're going to have focaccia to eat. The one thing I do want to have happen in about 5 minutes, I'm actually going to let this cool down. I'm actually going to take this out of the tray. I'm going to place it on a cooling rack and let it fully cool before it's devoured. There's nothing better than focaccia fresh from the oven, and I'm so excited to try it. All right, so we're about done. So the olive focaccia is ready to come out of the oven. So I want to bring it out and put it here. We can take a look at both versions side by side. Let's go over and do that right now. This looks fantastic. All right, this oven closed. So again, I'm going to take some olive oil, and I'm going to douse this with olive oil again. Olive oil and focaccia are really good friends. Yum. How's that? It's all going to soak in. Don't mind if there's too much. It'll soak into the dough or to the cooked focaccia. A little bit of salt here at the end, I think. A little bit more salt at the end. Salty focaccia is a good thing. But it's interesting though, look, I made these doughs at the same time. And look at how differently they came out, just because of timing or some interaction with the dough. It's quite interesting. So this has to cool off. So what I'm gonna do is put this aside for now, and we're gonna talk about the first version. All right, so what we have here is some beautifully done focaccia in the Ligurian style. Now, let's take a bite of this. So we're gonna I'm gonna cut some of this with a bread knife. A beautiful slice out of here. It's gonna come apart. That yum crust is resisting me cutting it. Let's take a look at how we did. Look at that gorgeous golden brown crust. We did really, really, really well. That's yummy. So what we're gonna do now is just take this corner piece, a couple more pieces as well, like that. I'm gonna take some beautiful olive oil that I keep just for occasions like this. This is a really, really fruity olive oil that I really like with that color. I'm also gonna take some of this really yummy, super great balsamic vinegar and pour it right next to it like that. Add a little bit of salt to the whole thing. And really what there is to do is just take a piece of focaccia, dip it in this, and enjoy. Warm, crunchy, really great. So what focaccia is good for? It's good for eating just like this, or you can make sandwiches out of it. Personally, I like a little dry salami and some arugula on my focaccia for a really great sandwich. You can have it with salads, with dinner. You can have it just anytime you want. This is such a versatile bread that everyone smiles when they see it. It's really great. So we're done for today. Again, thanks for joining us here at TastiLab. You can find this recipe online at www.tastilab.com. My name is Scott Fairbanks in the TastiLab kitchen. Thank you so much for being here today with us, and we'll see you again.